It's the pleasure of hanging out with the people that you're with. And so, Rob and I was always a great hang. When he would come over to listen to what I was doing, we would sit and kibitz for hours and then eventually get around to the music. That's what I mostly think of when I think of him, is just the time together laughing.
This is Alec Baldwin, and you're listening to Here's the Thing from iHeart Radio.
You can't stop an avalanche as it races down the hill. You can try to stop the seasons, girl, but you know you never will.
It is a skill that feels like a gift from the divine. To write an unforgettable song, one that gets stuck in your head or makes you want to dance, is a talent that should be exalted. Now imagine it's your life's work for 50 years.
You can't stop the beat. Ever since this whole world began, a woman found out if she shook and she can shake up a man. And so I'm gonna shake and shimmy it the best that I can today. 'Cause you can't stop the motion of the...
That's You Can't Stop the Beat from the 2002 Broadway cast recording of Hairspray, written by my guest today, composer and lyricist Marc Shaiman. Shaiman is a two-time Emmy, Grammy, and BAFTA winner, as well as a Tony Award recipient. He's also been nominated for 7 Academy Awards. His 5-decade career began at just 16 years of age. His work as a composer, lyricist, arranger, and producer spans film, television, and theater. In addition to the hit musical Hairspray, Shaiman is known for co-creating the musicals Catch Me If You Can, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and Some Like It Hot. His film scores include smash hits like The Addams Family, City Slickers, Sister Act, Sleepless in Seattle, and the first South Park movie. Perhaps most famously, Marc Shaiman was also a frequent collaborator with the late Rob Reiner. For Reiner, he penned the scores of classic films like When Harry Met Sally, Misery, A Few Good Men, The American President, and many others. As someone who set out to work in the theater, I was curious how Shaiman and Reiner's paths crossed between New York and L.A.
I was lucky enough to work up at Saturday Night Live, freelance, for, after the original cast left and Paul Schaefer was, the funny Jewish guy at the piano. And then he wasn't there for a few years. And so I started getting that call to go up there. And so I met Billy Crystal and Martin Short, Christopher Guest. I worked there previous years, but I worked there a lot that year that they came on that one year and really hit it off with them all. And Billy Crystal asked me to go out on the road with him. And I would play for his act. Even though it was a comic act, he would sing as Sammy Davis Jr., he would sing as other things. And also I would underscore some of his monologues. And so Rob Reiner came to see that and kind of heard me underscoring, even though there's comedic, but he heard that. And then Billy was making When Harry Met Sally and asked Rob, what are you going to do for the music? And Rob said, I need a guy who knows like every song from the American Songbook. And Billy was like, have I got a guy for you? Because Billy is a real mensch like that. And I went and met Rob, and I brought him my Rodgers and Hart songbook because after reading the script, I knew that the song, If They Asked Me, I Could Write a Book, ends with the lyric, then the world discovers as my book ends how to make two lovers from friends, which seemed perfect for When Harry Met Sally. And Rob said, you're hired. And that began a lifelong relationship.
What did you prefer about working with him?
Well, I often think about the fact that once you've established that you have the talent to do that, and I know that Rob would say the same thing, it's about the hang. I'm sure you understand and know that, Once everyone knows that, you got the job and you can do what you can do, it's the pleasure of hanging out with the people that you're with. And so, Rob and I was always a great hang. When he would come over to listen to what I was doing, we would sit and kibitz for hours and then eventually get around to the music. That's what I mostly think of when I think of him, is just the time together laughing.
When you were producing music with him and scoring music for his films, was a lot of that work done at Warner's? Is that where Castle Rock had their equipment, so to speak? Where would you go?
We went everywhere. That's about just whatever recording studio is available at the time you're recording. When Harry Met Sally was the first one, and that one I was just arranging and orchestrating existing music, helping to choose the records or the songs, and deciding whether to use the recordings or create our own. At the same time, Rob's friend Bobby Colomby, who used to be the drummer for Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Bobby Colomby had become an executive at CBS, at Columbia Records. And he said, I've got this kid named Harry Connick Jr., who sounds like he'd be perfect for this. So I was sent up to Seattle, where Harry was doing a gig with just this trio. This was before he
blew up,
because the movie is what made that happen. And I think we both kind of felt this probably the same way, like, well, who's this guy? Who needs, we both thought, I'm the young whippersnapper at the piano and figuring it out. And the first session when he came down to L.A. with his trio, I had worked it out with Rob, what song, what tempo, what key it had to be in because it had to segue into another record or whatever. And that first meeting, that first session, Harry was a little like, don't tell me how to, play or what to play. I'm not just coloring in the lines that you've drawn. I mean, it was just a subtext all day.
This is not Arthur Murray.
Yeah. So I remember driving home, and I think I even called Rob and said, gee, Mondays with the orchestra, we can't have that kind of big discussions about everything with an orchestra sitting there. The clock, you just can't have that. I was petrified of what was going to happen. Meanwhile, it was that song, I Could Write a Book, was going to be the first thing we were going to record. They had filmed the scene. This is where Harry and Sally are at a New Year's Eve celebration, and they start dancing, and they kind of realize there's a chemistry there. And so I had said, this is a perfect spot for that song, and let's make sure that lyric about make two lovers of friends falls right at that perfect moment. And I had orchestrated, and I had, adored Nelson Riddle's orchestrations for Frank Sinatra. That was my, the king. And so I created a Frank Sinatra, Nelson Riddle style orchestration for this one moment. And then Harry was behind me. I can't see him, but I count in the orchestra, and he starts singing. And whatever had happened the previous Friday between us dissipated immediately. We were just fell in love. It was like he was singing like Frank Sinatra, and I was doing my best Nelson Riddle, and it was just,
together again for the first time.
Yes. So then we made that record. So then Bobby Colomby said, hey guys, a lot of the records that we used in the movie, thank God for us, they couldn't get the rights to use for soundtrack. It's actually mostly Ella Fitzgerald, whoever negotiated her deals back in the day, made it very different about using it in a movie and using it on a record. So he said, how about you guys just make your own record, kind of inspired by the music from When Harry Met Sally? Here's a couple of dollars. So Harry and I went off to New York, and we recorded the album, which blew up.
All Sinatra standards?
No, it was just all the songs that were in the movie. Some of them Sinatra. One of them, the biggest one being It Had to Be You. And that made Harry Connick Jr. a star. And it made both of us suddenly the co-producers of a platinum plus album. And it just, that's how it all started. And at the same time, I was working with Bette Midler. So that was Beaches. And the same kind of thing happened there. An album where I was arranging and orchestrating blew up, and I suddenly had these two albums and these two movies, and then bam, it just started one after another.
I'm shooting Ghosts of Mississippi with Rob, and Rob was, the actor's director, as people mention all the time. And I'll never forget, he says to me, you mind if I put the camera in the back of the church? I'm going to put in the courtroom, I'm going to put it way in the back, shoot a big master of all you guys doing, and you got your big speech. Would you do it one more time for me? Maybe do it twice, because it was like a 3-page or 2.5-page monologue, court summation. And I'm going to put the camera in the back and shoot. Do you mind if we do that? We'll do like maybe 2 takes? I go, yeah, that sounds great to me. He goes, you see what I mean? You got a great piece of dialogue, a speech, you do it over and over again, because your next movie, you're going to say one line the whole day. It's going to be, get down! Everybody get down! So when you have real dialogue, you really like it. And then he says to Diane Ladd comes to work one day. I'll never forget this. And we worshipped her. She has a doll. And she sits there and she goes, now, Rob, Why would I give him the gun? It makes no sense, Rob. I wouldn't just hand him the rifle, this piece of evidence that her husband had hidden. He was the judge in the case. So Rob sits down with Diane Ladd on a piece of furniture on the set and talks to her for like 45 minutes. He turns to me and goes, would you give me a minute? And I leave. And he talks to her, and when it's over, he walks to me and goes, we're going to have to do this sooner or later. Might as well get it out of the way sooner. You know what I mean? Like, she had to go through her process,
right.
regardless of how many gears she was grinding to a halt. And I was amazed how patient he was. I didn't expect him to be that patient because he seemed so
That actually
intense.
surprises me, because the one thing I would never say that he was patient.
He was with Diane Ladd, yeah.
When you say he was an actor's director, so I know when he would come over to me, Misery was the next movie, and now I was really composing my own music. And he would always like what he heard, but sometimes he would say, can it go here and there? And he would sing a note. And it took a few movies for me to finally say to him, Rob, if you're going to keep singing, giving me line readings with notes, I'm going to send you to a voice teacher to at least expand your range.
Exactly. Now, when you did Misery, was I told you had some doubts about that because it was kind of a dark movie? Or
Well, so I had done When Harry Met Sally. I had learned how music gets put in a movie, and then Rob came to see a HBO special that Billy Crystal made where I got to score like 5 minutes of it in a real cinematic fashion. And he called me the next morning and said, hey, buddy, you want to do my next movie? It's a psychological thriller called Misery. And of course I want to say yes. I wasn't going to say no, but I was petrified. I was like, why would he? I don't know that I can do that. Especially a psychological thriller. I mean, I would understand if someone thought, hey, you want to do a burlesque, some movie about vaudeville?
Right.
I would get. And I had just gotten with an agent, and even my agent, Richard, said to Rob, are you sure he can do this? What makes you think he can do this? And Rob said, Richard, talent is talent. And that became Richard, my agent's mantra. On all these other jobs he started getting me where no one had heard anything I'd ever written. He would just give them the Rob Reiner, talent is talent. So I have Rob to thank for that. And then I also have Rob to thank for that. I used to smoke dope constantly.
I referenced this. I read this, yeah.
So I smoked dope before a movie, before a meal, before sex. I think I even...
Did you smoke dope while you were composing?
Always.
So what were you the most stoned on? What's the music that is unearthed from your deepest level of stonedness?
Nothing that's in a movie, because I just thought I had to get stoned before I could write or arrange music. And by the second or third day of trying to write Misery, and I was so petrified anyway, I couldn't wake up at 10 in the morning and take a few tokes. I'd want to go to sleep by noon, and I had to work until 10 at night. I mean, writing a movie score is a big, long job. So I thought, let me try one day. Can I write music without getting stoned? And I did. And then it was another day and another. And then I thought, let me get through the end of the week. And so Rob Reiner helped me quit pot cold turkey.
God. Did you find that when you were stoned sometimes, and then you would come back and revisit it and you weren't stoned, was the music not what it might have been?
Yeah, I think it was Hemingway, maybe, who said, write drunk and edit sober.
Talk about Bette Midler, because you have collaborations with people where they're doing shows. One thing was like Billy Crystal does his farewell on Leno,
right.
And you came in. That's on Leno's show. That's on the Tonight Show.
Both of Leno's farewells.
Okay,
yeah, there were many of them.
You're going on there, and what are you doing to help contribute to the show?
Writing the special lyrics. I mean, that's something I've done with Billy. You know, we did all those Oscar medleys.
Sure.
You know, the medleys of. So for both those Leno appearances, yeah, the second one, the one that was the actual farewell, we wrote for Carol Burnett and Oprah and Kim Kardashian, and it was quite a group of people who sang So Long Farewell. We wrote new lyrics, The Sound of Music, So Long Farewell.
Goodbye.
Yeah. So that's just something Billy and I do constantly. You know, the greatest one was with Bette Midler on the final Johnny Carson. I mean, that's a memory of mine that will... It's just...
You never thought you'd cry from Johnny Carson.
Yeah.
But you do.
You know, that
was the song again?
One for My Baby, One for the Road. Oh, and that's the other kind of gig that I do a lot, or did a lot, where Bette called and said, they asked me to be the last guest. What song should I sing? And I remember I was taking a shower after getting off the phone with her, and I thought, it's 2:45. There's no one in the place. It's about you're singing to a bartender who's been listening to you talk and talk, and he just wants to go home. And I thought, it's perfect.
Yeah, you're in a bar with him.
You know, so I called Bette, dripping wet. I've got it, the perfect song. And she always says, yeah, well, what else you got? But she came over and we worked it out.
2:45. There's no one in the place except you and me. So set 'em up, Joe. Got a little story I think you should know.
And we did change a few of the lyrics at the end, which was rather ballsy of us to change Johnny Mercer lyrics, but we addressed Johnny Carson specifically in the last verse. For all of the years, for the laughs, for the tears, for the class that you showed.
For the tears, for the class that you showed. Make it one for my baby and one more for the road. That long, long road.
And, you know, that moment was just, I'll never, ever forget it.
The most compelling thing about that, because I've seen that many, many times, is how attentive he is. Meaning, here's a guy who had the attention span sometimes, not every show. If he liked you and you were an old pal, and he's right there with Dean Martin and those kinds of icons, but at other times he had the attention span of a tsetse fly.
Yeah.
And you'd sit there, but he's locked into her eyes. He doesn't move. You'd think he's Cary Grant with Ingrid Bergman.
Yeah, and that the director kind of knew that was maybe going to happen because that angle that had never been used before over Bette's shoulder of Carson watching and listening, it's so, you're just mesmerized by it, and exactly what you're saying, he's so locked in.
Composer and lyricist Marc Shaiman. If you enjoy conversations with composers whose careers began at a young age, check out my episode with Paul Williams.
Most pop songwriters writing for a film or a stage play want to have a hit. Of course, we all want to have a hit. But because I come from an acting background, I want to advance the story and I want to expose something of the inner life of the character I'm writing for. That was the whole point with Kermit, is that he has a spiritual life, you know. I was never a kid that was in a gang that had a treehouse. When I walked on the set of The Muppet Show, I was with a gang that had a treehouse.
To hear more of my conversation with Paul Williams, go to here'sthething.org. After the break, Marc Shaiman talks about how he wound up living in Bette Midler's guest room at age 17. I'm Alec Baldwin, and this is Here's the Thing. At only 16 years old, Marc Shaiman decided to leave school and begin working in the New York theater scene. This bold decision paid off handsomely. It wasn't long before Marc found himself playing at downtown theaters and eventually the stages of Saturday Night Live. Incredibly, before he'd even turned 18, Shaiman would find himself arranging music for his childhood idol. I wanted to know how he managed to kickstart his career at such a tender age.
I went to New York with a friend.
Wittman.
I met Scott Wittman there, which was amazing because I just went to see a musical that was at the Actors Playhouse that used to be there in Sheridan Square called Boy Meets Boy. It was like a 1930s style musical, but about two guys. This is back in exactly 1976. And we ran into some other friends from New Jersey on the street, and we said, let's step into this little place here and catch up. And there was a piano in there. And so I was 16 and full of, vim and vigor. And I went to the piano and started playing. And just like out of an old black and white movie, the bartender was sweeping up and he stopped and he went, "Hey, kid, you're good. Wait right here." And he went down to the duplex, two doors down, where there was a comedy group that was looking for a funnier piano player than who they had. And they came in and said, "Can you play Together Wherever We Go from Gypsy?" And I played it like it is in the musical. They said, No, can you play it cheesy? I said, oh, you mean like at a bar mitzvah? Like or how Stephen Eady would do it on Merv Griffin? Wherever we go, yeah, wherever. And they were like, that's it, you're hired. And John Michel, the guy who was sweeping up behind the bar, he also hired me that very afternoon to play at Marie's Crisis. Because of, I guess, the way I played piano, no one could imagine that I was only 16 years old. So
so your talent at the piano obscured your age, then, you believe?
Yeah, if you see pictures of me, I
you have a very boyish face when you were younger. I can imagine you were very boyish.
Yeah, I know. I was a pimple on two legs. I
remember
was
that.
Little. So, but John Michel hired me, never asked me how old I was. And when I turned 17 that October, I lied and said, it's my birthday and I'm turning 18. So I have been here. Well, I shouldn't have been. They didn't seem to care, but I was lying. I was only turning 17. That New Year's Eve, they lowered me from the balcony in a diaper. And that's when I thought, maybe it's time to move on to another job. But that was my start at Marie's Crisis.
Where'd you go from there?
I was very lucky. My fairy tale, I just adored Bette Midler. When Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy came on the radio when I was like 13 and a kid in New Jersey, I became obsessed with her. Truly obsessed, like posters on the wall, lifting money from my father's wallet and cutting school to go see her in concert on Broadway. And then Scott Wittman, who was the director of that comedy act, I started staying at his apartment to play for the act on the weekends, and he lived across the hall from one of Bette Midler's backup singers, who were called the Harlettes. And they wanted to do their own act, and there I was across the hall, and I was at 17 at that point, and I would work for free, and I was right there, and I knew the kind of harmonies they wanted from my
Were they bar mitzvah tunes? No.
No.
Okay.
These are, beyond...
Legit.
Yeah, legit. So I became their musical director. Then Bette said, girls, I'm doing another tour. I'll let you do a whole opening act if you come back and also be my backup singers. So I was flown to L.A., and after having the fantasy of running down an aisle to Bette Midler when I went to see her in concert saying, oh, Miss Midler, I know every note of every song, of every arrangement on every record. Please let me play for you. I was flown to L.A. I taught Bette's band the Harlettes material, and then in walks Bette Midler. And I'm just like a year and a half away from having her posters on the wall, and I'm watching her rehearse. And she calls out a song to the band that she wants to do from her third album, but the music isn't on their music stands. And one of the Harlettes goes over to Bette and says, you see him back there? You know that. And Bette called
it's your
out.
Eve Harrington moment.
Yeah, very. And Bette said, do you know how to play no gesturing? And I got to actually walk up to a stage and say, oh, Miss Midler, I know every note of every song, of every arrangement on every record. Please let me play for you. So my dream came true. I hadn't even turned 18.
And you're 17.
Yeah. And because she's a frugal gal, she said, stick around. I could use you. But instead of putting me in a hotel, she put me in her guest room of her rented house that she was staying at. So and it wasn't even
in L.A.
It wasn't even a guest house in the backyard.
It was in L.A.
L.A. I was living with Bette Midler suddenly for the
From
whole
Marie's Crisis to Bette Midler's house.
Yeah, which was it was sort of the
That's
same
a pole
material.
vault.
only the right person was singing
Better
it.
piano.
Yeah.
What is it about her that you've sustained? I mean, obviously people have these batteries, these linkages between people, and you have this profound relationship with her. What was it about her that you admired the most?
Well, I just love the way she performs, as anyone who's seen her does. The fact that she does it all, that she can be so funny and then heartbreaking, and how she can turn it on a dime, how she can change. She's just so in command, and she's just the greatest.
She's the opposite of what my friend said about Chicago. My friend said that a famous actress came in. She did the piece to play Roxy in Chicago, and in that cycle of famous dames that came and did the show. And he said she walks in and she leaves, and everyone's sitting there quietly. And he turns to me and goes, she can't sing, she can't dance, she can't act. She's a star.
Well, that can also be the case.
Which is Bette is the opposite. She can sing and dance and act.
Yes. And we have a similar personality of, like the title of my book, Never Mind the Happy. That comes from my mother. One New Year's Day, my sister said, Ma, I want to be the first to wish you a happy and healthy New Year. And my mother defined Judaism when she said, never mind the happy. So that's in my blood.
Where was she? Where'd you grow up again? New Jersey?
In New Jersey, right over there, yeah.
Over there.
And so Bette had her father was a similar kind of personality. And we both just click that way and argue that way. You know, we have a real brother-sister relationship.
Was she right a lot of the time? Or did she rely on you being right most of the time?
Well, you know, her taste is impeccable, but like I mentioned before, she's always saying, what else you got? She's just always second-guessing.
She wants to cover every base.
Even that night on the Johnny Carson show, on the final one, she asked the band that afternoon, what's his favorite song? And they all said, Here's That Rainy Day. And I could see the wheels turning in her. Even then, she was still doubting, should we really do One for My Baby? And sure enough, during that show, she starts singing Here's That Rainy Day with him. And he starts singing it with her, which is a whole other magical moment. But I'm backstage at the piano because the next thing that's going to happen is One for My Baby. And I have a little TV monitor on the piano. And I'm having this schizoid conversation in my head. On the one hand, I'm going, this is magical. What's happening between Bette and Johnny Carson? And he's singing in key. And gee, the piano player's not coming in. Should I join in? The other part of my brain is going, she's spoiling. She knows if this moment happens, she's not going to have to sing the song that we've planned. And I'm like, no. I should start banging away to make it stop or something. But I'm a piano player. I'm an accompanist. I start joining in. So I actually got to play for Johnny Carson singing Here's That Rainy Day. And luckily, they came back and said, okay, we're still set for the big ballad at the end. So it all worked out. But she's always wondering what else. What else could it be?
You did a piece with Peter Allen.
I did.
We're going to describe that in a minute. But when I was in college at GW in Washington for the first 3 years, one woman I dated, she really got me turned on to a lot of, what would be pretty eclectic music for somebody from my background who was smoking pot in the woods in Massapequa, listening to Beatles, Zeppelin, Stones, Who. British Invasion, rock and roller in my mind, Clapton and Moody Blues and so forth. And she turned me on to Peter Allen, and It's Live with Peter Allen, and Boz Scaggs I never heard of, and they turned me on him, who I love. And it always takes me back to Hugh Jackman, and here he's playing Wolverine and all the psychotic craziness and murderers and superheroes. And he plays Peter Allen on Broadway, which I find that range is breathtaking. Describe how you met him and how you were involved with him.
That was another, out of the blue, I got a phone call from Craig Zadan and Neil Merrin. Craig was going to direct. Peter Allen was doing a Broadway concert called Up and One. That was basically just a concert, but it had a kind of a story of his life through line. And they had heard about me from this cabaret and Bette Midler circuit, and they called me out of the blue and said, you want to be Peter Allen's musical director for the show? That time I was the ripe old age of 19, and that was my first Broadway gig. You mentioned Clapton. I have to tell you, I have a Rob Reiner Clapton story on the movie The Story of Us with Bruce Willis and Michelle Pfeiffer. Rob said, buddy, Eric Clapton's going to write songs for the movie, but would you still help figure out how to turn those songs into the underscore? And I was like, work with Clapton? Okay.
Let me get back to you.
Yeah. And when you talked about Rob patience and impatience, at the one scoring session, there's a song that Clapton wrote that runs throughout the movie, but in the end titles, we did like a full record version of it. So I had a string section, and I had this one evocative chord, a very film noir chord it seemed to fit the lyric and the chord that Clapton had written, but it's what we call a C minor major seventh chord. But the first time the strings played it sounded a little odd because it can be almost discordant, let's say.
Yes.
And Rob immediately went, what's that? And, he starts rubbing that one side of his head that would only like one side of his head would sweat. And he's like, what's that? I said, just let me work with the strings for just a minute to get the right balance. And so I'm working for a few 10, 20 seconds more, and he's still like, oh, what is that? What is that? And I'm still trying to get my nice chord in there. And then Eric Clapton strolled out to the conductor's stand and said, Marc, those chords at measure 33, I think they're just too attractive. And I had to tell the whole orchestra, I said, I was just told to get over it in the nicest way I've ever possibly heard, the classiest way they're just too attractive, which was true. It just meant it's calling your ear too much to it. You're calling too much attention to.
It's leaping out.
Yeah. Also, him and Rob came over the house once to work out stuff. I was also working on the South Park movie at the same time, and I
need to talk about that.
Intense deadlines. I had to finish what I was writing to get to the orchestrator. And Rob and Eric Clapton were just talking, and then Eric Clapton had his guitar out, and I could tell he kind of wanted to just sit and jam with me. But I had to get back to the South Park, and I actually sort of had to tell them both to get lost. So my big chance to jam with Eric Clapton, I threw it away.
Well, speaking of the South Park movie, which I am the president of the Film Actors Guild,
Yes.
FAG, with the big banner of
No,
my
that was the second movie. Yes,
that was the
Team America, which I got fired from.
You got fired? Why?
Well, I'd done South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, and had the greatest experience of my life
With the two of them.
Yeah, I mean, and Trey Parker is that word that gets thrown around, genius. He is a genius. He can do it all, right? So, music, lyrics, act, write, direct, and extremely open and collaborative. So when I got involved through Scott Wittman on the South Park movie, I suddenly was the older professor who would help Trey realize his vision of creating a musical. And that was just the greatest year maybe I'd ever had in the movies. And then so a few years later, he asked me to do Team America. And in the same way, never came to listen to what I was writing, didn't even come to the orchestra sessions. He just trusted me. But then, after the third day of the recording sessions, the music editor played him what I'd been recording, and he didn't like it. He said, "Oh, it's too specific to the movie. I want it to be like wallpaper music." He felt like those Top Gun movies just kind of got library music, that was just being rolled out, that wasn't specific enough to the movie.
Elevator music.
And so I had the most awkward meeting of my life where they were like, "We want you to start over, but we need it in 10 days. Do you think you can do it?" And not only did I not know if I could physically do it, but emotionally I was so devastated. I was like, if I have to, okay, but I think I'd rather just crawl into a hole and maybe get someone else to do it, which they did, which didn't make Scott Wittman very happy. And Scott Wittman put me under house arrest, and I had to stay in my house in L.A. for a full month until other people came in, wrote new music, it got recorded. In case I was needed to be brought back
they came
in,
to their senses.
I wasn't allowed to leave Los Angeles, and I was prisoner of the house. So that was devastating, having just had the most glorious experience with them. But that's, show business. That's a lot of the point of my book.
It's like Chinatown.
Yeah.
Like Chinatown, where they say, you got 10 days.
Yeah.
And he writes the score, one of the most legendary scores in 10 days.
Only I was the guy who they fired and got. Right. I wasn't Jerry Goldsmith who wrote it in 10 days. Yeah, maybe I could have pulled it off, but I was just devastated. And I just didn't think I could.
Let me ask you this, because I made films, and I made, bigger studio films and starred in those films.
I've seen them.
Well, I don't assume that at all. But music can make such a profound...
Of course.
Or what I want to go is, fellas, if the music isn't anything, cut it.
Yeah.
No music.
Jerry Goldsmith had a quote that he used to say to them, "Fellas, I could put makeup on the corpse, but I can't make it breathe."
Right. Right. And do you feel that sometimes people are saying to you, "I want more music here," whatever?
Yeah. I had all sorts of experiences like that. But yes, the music, a movie without music, it's even the greatest movies you could watch, and if you watch them without music,
it's naked.
It's naked. Yeah, it's dry. And then the art is knowing where and when not to put music, and how much.
Are you usually right about that, or the director, or both, or the editor?
It's a collaboration. I talk in the book about how on Sleepless in Seattle, there were 2 spots that I thought really should have music. And Nora Ephron was like, "I don't think so, but, go with your instinct and write it." And when we went to record the music, at that point, her personality had changed over a few weeks. And I was seeing another side of her. And at the recording sessions, when I recorded those 2 pieces of music, when we were finished, she said, "It's very nice music, Marc. I just wish I had somewhere in the movie to use it."
Jonathan Demme once said to me, we were shooting a movie, he goes, "That's a great idea," he said, "just not for this movie."
Yeah, well, there you go.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So those are 2 spots in that movie that doesn't have music that my agent says sometimes he teaches film score classes, and he uses those 2 moments to give to the students to say, here are 2 moments that really could use music but don't have it. So write music there, and that way when you send it off to a producer and all, they get to see a movie they know, that they're already seeing movie stars and they're hearing music under. So I'm very happy for those students who are getting to write the music that I wanted.
Are you someone who your proximity to the film business and your intimate relationship with the film business on this deep, deep level of writing this music. And then when you're away from that, you don't watch movies, you don't watch TV? Or do you watch programming?
No, I watch.
What do you watch?
Well, I married a avid sports man.
Right.
So now I watch football and I watch
Is that what he is,
basketball.
an avid sportsman?
What would you call it, an avid sports fan?
Fan. Let's say fan, not man. Fan.
Yeah. Yeah, I watch sport. If my father was alive, he wouldn't believe that when I think of when I used to walk into the house and he'd be watching football with his friends and I would just quickly go into my little room and my piano. I had no interest in football or anything, but now I go to Knicks games.
Yeah. He's a sports nut?
Yes.
What does he like?
Everything. Anything that involves a sphere being thrown or kicked.
Violence.
Yeah. He just he loves it all. It's a real odd couple.
Yeah, you can
And
see
you
that.
know, I
You
did.
take one look at him. He's like a villain in a Bond film,
Yeah.
this guy. He's so good looking and so built.
And I've really learned to love it. I really do love watching it all.
Composer and lyricist Marc Shaiman. If you're enjoying this conversation, tell a friend and be sure to follow Here's the Thing on the iHeart Radio app, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. When we come back, Marc Shaiman tells us which of Rob Reiner's films he will always stop to watch on TV and why it's the most meaningful of his 14 scores for the late director. I'm Alec Baldwin, and this is Here's the Thing. Marc Shaiman has written and arranged music for countless artists such as Mariah Carey, Bette Midler, Harry Connick Jr., and Billy Crystal. Whether for late-night TV, award shows, concerts, or a Christmas album, Shaiman adapts to the task at hand. I was curious as a musician what differences he found between working with actors, singers, and comedians.
Yeah, the thing that makes me think of is I did Sister Act and Whoopi Goldberg. You would maybe say that what you're saying about Billy, you know, and then when we got together to sing, it turns out she started singing like a white folk singer. She was singing like that. I was like, really? It was not what you would expect to come out of Whoopi Goldberg. But I put together two friends, Charlotte Crossley and Jennifer Lewis, who are very funny girls who are both harlots with Bette Midler and are gregarious, funny, great girls. And I knew, well, I kind of figured if I put them together with Whoopi and we rehearse the songs for Sister Act with her, we'll just laugh. And we'll laugh and we'll have a good time. And then she'll just forget about being nervous about singing. And that's exactly what happened. We had a great time. And by the time it was time to record and film, Whoopi didn't give a fuck anymore about like all the other things that she might have been thinking of. We were just laughing. We were just had such a good time. And of course, you record a lot of takes and you take a note from track 1 and you take a note from track 4, but that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's really a matter of, coaxing sometimes. So whoever you work with at the Ansonia,
Now, your first sojourn into Broadway was what?
Well, I wanted to write Broadway shows when I was in my 20s, but couldn't get a break. And me and my co-lyricist and at that time life partner, Scott Wittman, we were trying to write shows, but we just couldn't get in there. And it was the time of the big British musicals and
Les Mis and so forth.
And then my movie career fell in my lap, and we were suddenly living in L.A. for a year. But then luckily,
Movies before Broadway.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I wanted to be Broadway, and then the movies fell in my lap. And then the entire 90s, I was scoring one movie after another. And that was the other reason why the South Park movie was the greatest gig ever, because not only was it unto itself the greatest gig, it suddenly put my name back in the mouths of the Broadway crowd. And a woman named Margot Lyon had just gotten the rights to Hairspray, the John Waters film. And everyone she went to said, who do you think I should get to do the score for Hairspray? And everyone had just come from the South Park movie and said, you got to get Marc Shaiman. You got to get Marc Shaiman. So that movie led me to the absolute dream come true, which was writing Hairspray. And because Scott had moved to L.A. with me, and I had really torn him away from the theatrical community of New York, and I was scoring one movie after another, and Scott didn't have much to do. Scott is quoted as saying in L.A. he learned how to drink and drive. So when Margot said, would you like to write the music for Hairspray? I was like, yes. And she said, who would you like to write the lyrics? I said, well, me and my partner, Scott. And I won't do it unless it's me and my partner, Scott.
And they acquiesced.
Well, she said, well, I don't know you guys as lyricists. I don't know. And I said, well, the South Park movie, it says additional music and lyrics. But, music by was what most people had ever seen. And she didn't, and also she was scared of, I think, of hiring a couple. Like, what happens if they fight? But yeah, so luckily she said, would you write some songs on spec for me to hear? And I was like, sure. And so Scott and I immediately started working, and the 4 songs we wrote are Good Morning Baltimore, Welcome to the 60s, Big Blonde and Beautiful, and I Know Where I've Been, which are still now kind of the 4 tent poles of that musical, which shows you what a fairy tale it was, in that usually the first songs you write for a show get discarded along the way as you start to discover what's needed. But the first 4 songs we wrote are still like those strong
the planks
ones, yeah. And then that just became just the greatest dream come true.
What was after that?
Well, we wrote a musical with Marty Short. Marty Short, Fame Becomes Me,
right,
which was a one-man show but with a cast. And I was on stage with him. And that was a thrill, although it was tough because it was a kind of inside baseball kind of thing about how Broadway was full of all these one-person shows. And so Marty was spoofing the idea that he had a one-person show in him for all the trials and tribulations of his life because he's the happiest man on earth, so it's not really true. And then Catch Me If You Can was the next one Scott and I did, which,
was based on the film.
Yeah.
Who comes ringing your doorbell? Does Spielberg ring the bell or somebody else?
No, in this case, Scott and I went to the drama bookstore to get a copy of Stage Door. Someone had asked us if we would be interested in writing a musical of Stage Door, which is the old Katharine Hepburn movie of the calla lilies are in bloom.
Yeah.
I hope all your readers and listeners will now...
You nailed it as far as I'm concerned.
Google Stage Door and Katharine Hepburn.
Once you have a Tony and an Oscar, you just can do anything.
Yeah. So we went to get that play, but there was a coffee table book out elsewhere in the drama bookstore of Catch Me If You Can about the making of it. And Scott looked at that and the pictures of Pan Am stewardesses and Leonardo DiCaprio and all the different disguises.
Very evocative.
And he said, I'd rather write a musical of that. And because I knew Steven Spielberg only through Marty Short Christmas parties, one year he brought his clarinet and I played Hanukkah, Oh Hanukkah, while him and Kate Capshaw, he played the clarinet and she danced. So I felt like I had worked with him. So I asked Marty to give me like a phone number or email or whatever, and I just wrote Steven Spielberg directly. I said, we have this idea to do a musical of Catch Me If You Can. So I completely didn't go through agents or lawyers. I just went straight to the man, and we got the rights.
And how did that go?
It didn't have a long run. It gets done all the time now, and when I go to see it, we had this idea that it was Frank Jr. was putting on his life as if it was a television variety show from like 1964, which was still the peak time of like show business on TV, where Sinatra and Judy Garland, where it wasn't cheesy yet. It wasn't like, the bad 70s,
undeniably
Brady
talented.
Bunch variety kind of shows.
Right.
But we couldn't transplant it on stage. We never quite figured it out with our collaborators who we all adore, but it just didn't quite. The souffle didn't completely rise. I mean, I'm very proud of the score. I love it very much. And it gets done all the time now, and I do go to see it. Scott says when we go to see it, sometimes it's like a football coach bringing us into the locker room after the game and showing us footage of the game with a laser pointer going, that's where you went wrong. If we got a chance to do it again, I think I would know how to like fix it, make it even better, but it's still good.
Who directed?
Jack O'Brien.
Right. But the question also is, what I'm told, I don't know this as intimately maybe as you do, but my friends, I think somebody said to me, that there's only 4 new musicals on Broadway this year. What's, Wither, the Broadway musical, the new Broadway musical, because they're going to have 4 in that. Every show that's on is going to get nominated.
Yeah.
They got 4 slots.
If only I because we did Some Like It Hot, what was it, 3 years ago? Mm-hmm. And we were just at the beginning of coming out of COVID. And although we smelled like a hit, everyone thought we were this big hit, and we ran for a year. But it should have run for years and years and years.
Right.
But it's so expensive now.
Yeah. That's your critique of, because I would ask you, what's your critique of Broadway now?
Well, the last 2 shows I've done, people were really enjoying them, but we couldn't make enough money to pay what it cost. The money is just the math.
I wonder why they can't find a way to bring that down.
I don't know, and it's only going to keep getting worse because if you talk to the actors or the stage crew, they're like, and the orchestra, and they're like, yeah, you understand why they're fighting for what they want in the next deal, but somehow it's just blown up out of proportion that there is no kind of middle. If you look at classic musicals, they only ran for like a year and a half, like The Music Man or whatever. It wasn't like now where they have to, if they don't run for 10 years, it's considered a flop.
Right. Everyone's chasing that ring.
It's just impossible. So not many get to grab that brass ring the way that you could back in the day.
Who are people out there that you admire?
Alfred Newman.
Right.
John Williams.
Any contemporaries? I mean, who's somebody now that you like? You think their work is good?
There's a great guy. The last time I was nominated for an Oscar, I lost to Ludwig Göransson.
For what?
He had written for Black Panther, and I had written for Mary Poppins Returns, and I kind of thought maybe
Black Panther, Mary Poppins.
I thought, it was my 7th nomination. I thought this might be like my Susan Lucci moment, but Ludwig won. But he's a sweet guy, and he's brilliant. He just did Sinners. So he is someone I very much admire, and he's also so sweet and so nice, and just such a great guy.
So there are pieces in the classical repertoire that I just weep. A Saint-Saëns organ, symphony, whatever. There's the melodic thing, Dvorak, New World, whatever. Because I'm a classical nut. Are the pieces you've written, or the pieces you've been involved, or the movies and scenes where the picture and the music match, which bring you to tears, like they're really powerful to you?
The one that, and obviously now more than ever, is The American President with Rob Reiner. And God knows, because of what's happened in America, all these things converge to make that piece of music I got to write for that movie very, very meaningful to me. And I'll try not to start weeping. But it was a beautiful movie, and I got to write music that was just full of the respect that one used to have for the American president.
The dignity.
Yeah, exactly. And it worked so well, and it's one movie of mine that I could, if I channel hop across it, I'll stick with it. Michael Douglas was phenomenal.
Yeah, phenomenal.
So the music for that one is meaningful to me on so many levels. So, and I did a concert last year in San Diego, and I'm at the piano and kibitzing with the audience, but for that one piece, I did get up and conduct the orchestra, which is a very hard thing to do, conducting an orchestra and making them go at the speed that you want. That's a real talent that I don't really have because I'm an accompanist. So I let them lead, which you can't do because suddenly it gets much slower. But I was conducting it to the film, the main title. So I had to keep them going. And now, of course, I'm lucky that I had this moment with Rob in Sedona. There's a Sedona Film Festival. And I was an honoree one night and Rob was the honoree the next night. And for the Rob night, they showed this beautiful, pristine print of the American president, which I had seen on TV a lot, but I'd never seen it up on the screen again. It had been maybe 20 years. So I just watched this beautiful movie and got to hear this music I got to write for it, and was so grateful to Rob Reiner for everything, and especially this movie, and especially what it's about, and what had just started happening with Trump, and it just all bubbled up. And so my job was to then go to the mic and introduce Rob. The audience knew me from the night before, and it was my job to introduce Rob. And I was, I had a whole bunch of jokes I was going to crack. And I got up there at the mic and just started sobbing. Just absolute, couldn't get a word out, just stamping my feet. All I tried to say was, I'm so grateful to Rob Reiner, and so the tears had to just completely speak for me.
My thanks to composer Marc Shaiman. I'll leave you with a piece of Shaiman's score from Rob Reiner's The American President. I'm Alec Baldwin. Here's the Thing is brought to you by iHeart Radio.